the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive income.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number, or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know,
It's a
Zach.
tough one. I
It's
know,
really hard.
and maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back to Bread Theory. I am your host Zach, and joining me as usual is Dan Platt of the Albany Greens. How you doing tonight, Dan? Oh wait, your audio cut out.
That's because I muted it.
Ah,
Hey everybody. I finished another book. This time it was Red Plenty, which
yeah, you
is
were
from
talking about that the other week.
it's a sympathetic account of inside the 50s Soviet dream. So, during the Khrushchev era, which is 15 years,
Sure.
you're done with the Stalinism and the austere, brutal times. And Khrushchev was really like, in order to make, and by the way, so this is a fictionalized account. The guy
Sure.
was going to he's trying to do a non-fiction version, but I think the more he read, the more there were too many gaps. So rather than have a gap-filled non-fiction book, he was like, why don't I have a fictionalized account with some research bits about the science city and the people involved who are really trying to have a planned economy with computers and cybersyn and something to develop that. And then also the book kind of uses vignettes. It's really good storytelling. It jumps around. There's this cast of characters that pop in and out. It kind of starts with this guy who's a gene. No, not him, but unfortunately, I actually thought being fictionalized, I thought it was kind of going like it was going to succeed and have a happy ending because it's fiction. But instead, it's a fictionalized version of what really happened, which was because in the Stalin era that the industrialized economy was so just centered on the basic industrial commodities, and there was not the wiggle room to develop a consumer economy or a more advanced economy that could produce plastics and electronics. It just couldn't make that leap, or the resources could have been put that way, and they were sort of getting there, but the people involved had to fight for every crumb they got. It had to be justified militarily or something like that. It just wasn't getting the investment, and it was for political reasons of to change how things were working would be a risk. And Khrushchev was for taking risks, which is why it was getting the support it was, because he was making promises. But the thing about making promises is you might actually have to keep them. And that was a risk in itself. But he took too many risks. Cuban Missile Crisis is instigating that included.
Yeah.
So he was removed because he was becoming a liability of sorts. And Brezhnev is kind of the opposite, being like, I am an expert in organization and psychology, and just pretending to be a social scientist, or at least Khrushchev was something of an intellectual who read a lot, or in his ilk and in his cadre. And he was around with people who he had appointed, but if they were going to stay on tap, then he had to retire, which he did. And the book kind of ends with him just stewing in his thoughts of without the work, without thinking about the future, I'm only left with the bad memories of the war and all the brutal things I had to do. And it's just I can't justify it now, because before it's there was a present, there was a future, and it would have been worth it. And it would, but that's not the case. The future in the Soviet Union was also canceled by 1970. It was starting to happen by the late 60s, and it was by 1970 it was also canceled. for kind of different reasons than our future was canceled, but it's likely not coincidence it happened at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it does seem that U.S. was meddling quite a bit, especially at the end there. So.
Because they actually call the Khrushchev era the thaw because there was a sort of laxening of the grip of tyranny, you could call it,
Sure.
and with the end of the future and the tightening of putting stability first, you just get the same old brutal policy, and that includes the tightening of political speech and thought and anything else. Because hey, if you even bring up that there were these promises made about a plenty and you want to pursue that, well, now you're a troublemaker, and now you're and thus a traitor, which occurs to a biologist. And the writer points out that because of the shift in education during the Stalin era to just pumping out engineers and planners and economists, you get a complete denigration of the humanities and social science and biology, because like those areas of science, like they have to go in different directions. You have to be able to follow the evidence, and but that may, if you study history, or even this biologist was seeing in her data about like mutations, birth defects, that like there were these shocks and that there are these mass population disruptions before the war. So it's like if she follows her data, it's like there was a lot of people starving to death, and that's evidence that has to be buried, which means she has to get buried.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know how much is like how it really happened, because it's written by an American, even though he is interested in central planning or just general economic planning. He doesn't do many talks, but he was doing a talk at a University of Santa Fe and it was like a meetup of computer people talking about AI and economic planning, because like one of the things that like made sure that it wouldn't happen was like the computers just weren't good enough. But one chapter goes into, or vignette, is the economist. It's like, look, we have to have dynamic pricing or else these reforms that are being done aren't going to work. It's like, yeah, but, and this is the minister of the economy. It's like, but we have to be able to control the prices. Like, if whether a computer is choosing the prices for optimized purposes, it's like if they're wrong, people are going to blame us, not a computer.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be able to have control, because if we can control where we set the prices, we can then also control when things go bad, the consequences, whether it means cleaning things up here and there to assure that the least people are affected, or what have you. And you kind of get a similar psychology or justification for any kind of risk taking and reform or what have you, or making anything economic, sortition. It's like, well, we can't have democracy. It's so unstable.
Right. Yeah, it's unknown. It's that.
It's unknown. Yeah, you don't know what
chaos
the result will be. And you kind of see that even in leftist orgs, there's sort of like, we can't take the chance of not having a presumptive nominee.
Right.
In this way, I'm going to propose, or I wrote an article based on my conversation with Jasmine Sherman, that the Green Party, I don't know if it's legal, but we should really hold our presidential primary the year before the presidential year. Like, we need to choose our presidential candidate last summer, which was basically when we were like, anointing corner West. But if it wasn't going to be West, it needed to be someone else, and it needs to be chosen by the party. And then that person starts filling out the paperwork for being a candidate nationally with the FCC and not FCC. Yeah, the Federal Campaign Commission, I'm referring to. And start doing ballot drives, right? Because it needs to be a person in a campaign, not the party. And the main question for our candidate is, who is able to do ballot drives? Who's the figurehead for that? and it's usually one or two names at best. 2008 was when there was two possible names, and since then, it has just been one person. So it always like you get this really cynical line where it's like we're no better than the DNC anointing our candidate undemocratically chosen by the steering committee. Like you're right, but don't it really like I don't know why it burns me when someone says we're just like the DNC. Or they're just like they're just like the DNC. Like, yeah, because we're working within the same electoral system with those rules and those deadlines that require there to be a candidate that can do those ballot drives. Now the Democrats don't have to worry about any of that. So what's their excuse? Um, that's all been discussed.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's my summary / review of Red Plenty. Pretty
Sounds
interesting. Still sort of like I think it's even-handed with like its critique of the Soviet Union. He'll still describe it as being tyrannical and evil. It doesn't use the word evil, but just like the political repression is there,
Sure.
and it is real, and we shouldn't ignore it.
Right.
When we're putting our Marxist hat on, we're talking up the positives, despite the repression.
Yeah.
But the positives were very much like up to a point, and then it couldn't go further. It couldn't create plastic beakers. It couldn't build supercomputers. It could only copy American designs and try to replicate them. I know there was a video about all the different kinds of computers that the Soviet Union was building in the 80s. I would need to read more to know if they were created independently or were they just trying to recreate IBM machines from like, and they're 10 years behind, because that was like the case. At least put in the book with the final vignette.
Mm-hmm.
With a guy who's dying of lung cancer, waiting to make one last plea to the economic minister to not destroy the Soviet computer industry. Like, we need to have that. With an independent, like, because we had people creating new things. And we need that if we're going to develop a better socialism or even continue anything and even compete. But he's basically, the metaphor is he's being left to wait for hours in this dark hallway while he's coughing and dying of lung cancer. And Koizun isn't like meeting with him basically because he's not important. He's a nobody now, even though he came wearing all the medals he earned.
Sure.
Right, he earned all the medals.
But
the chapter, but the chapter, begins with like, well, once you're actually in the Moscow, the governing offices, it's like everyone has those medals. It's not worth as much.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, shall we get into the book that we've been reviewing?
Yes, the critique of the Gotha program. Though it's really a long letter, isn't it? Not a book.
Yeah. I guess that. What do they call that in?
Well, it's a treatise. These letters. You didn't have the internet, so when you're writing something to somebody, imagine putting, like the Twitter thread. Twitter thread.
Sure.
Or like 10 posts together.
Sure.
Or Substack.
Part 1 of 800. So. All right. Let's get into.
So where we even leave off?
Let's see. We could back up just a little bit.
I know we left off at the end of a paragraph, though. So.
Yeah, we did. Let's see if once we get into it, we can.
By the bourgeoisie's system, capitalism, is revolutionary because we're basically the ones that inherit society, and our task is to strip production of the capitalist character that the bourgeoisie, as Marx says, seeks to perpetuate. So, in other words, the lower middle class is becoming revolutionary in view of its impending transfer to the proletariat. In other words, not because of its current class interests, but because of its likely future ones that it can see. Anyway, continuing. From this
but
point
that seems
of view,
to be wrong, though.
It is
because when petty bourgeois or whatever, or middle class, or downwardly mobile, they don't really turn to the left. They become reactionaries because they just want to retain what they have by whatever means, and that usually means actually trying to put a stopgap on
Right.
those below them.
Yeah, if that means crushing the scapegoat of the day for them to maintain, just tread water, then so be it.
Like they have to push themselves up in
Right.
order to kind of stay in the middle, rather than pull themselves pulling on the top.
Right.
That's not what they do. They're not usually in a political position to, or they could be, but they choose to kind of be subservient to the rulers.
Yeah, well, they can't imagine another system, so they feel they got to work with what they got.
And they call it harm reduction.
There you go. Harm reduction for me, but not for thee. Yeah.
Again, nonsense to say that it, together with the bourgeoisie and with the feudal lords into the bargain, quote, form only one reactionary mass relative to the working class. Has one proclaimed to the artisan, small manufacturers, etc., and peasants during the last election, relative to us, you, together with the bourgeoisie and feudal lords, form one reactionary mass? That is funny. Lassalle knew the Communist Manifesto by heart, as his faithful followers know the Gospels written by him. If, therefore, he has falsified it so grossly, this has occurred only to put a good color on his alliance with absolutist and feudal opponents against the bourgeoisie. In the above paragraph, moreover, his oracular saying is dragged in by main force without any connection with the botched quotation from the rules of the International. Thus, it is simply an impertinence, and indeed not at all displeasing to Herr Bismarck, one of those cheap pieces of insolence in which the Marat of Berlin deals. Editor's note, the Marat of Berlin is a reference to Hasselmann, the chief editor of the Neuer Sozialdemokrat. Sentence 5. Quote, the working class strives for its emancipation, first of all, within the framework of the present-day national states, conscious that the necessary result of its efforts, which are common to the workers of all civilized countries, will be the international brotherhood of peoples. Unquote. Lassalle, in opposition to the Communist Manifesto and to all earlier socialism, conceived the workers' movement from the narrowest national standpoint. He is being followed in this, and that after the work of the International. It is altogether self-evident that, to be able to fight at all, the working class must organize itself at home as a class, and that its own country is the immediate arena of its struggle, insofar as its class struggle is national, not in substance, but, as the Communist Manifesto says, quote, in form. But the, quote, framework of the present-day national state, for instance, the German Empire, is itself, in its turn, economically, quote, within the framework of the world market, politically within the framework of the system of states. Every businessman knows that German trade is at the same time foreign trade, and the greatness of Herr Bismarck consists, to be sure, precisely in his pursuing a kind of international
which
policy.
is facilitated with
to
British
what
pounds.
does the German Workers' Party reduce its internationalism? To the consciousness that the result of its efforts will be the, quote, international brotherhood of peoples, a phrase borrowed from the Bourgeois League of Peace and Freedom, which is intended to pass as equivalent to the international brotherhood of working classes in the joint struggle against the ruling classes and their governments. Not a word, therefore, about the international functions of the German working class, and it is thus that it is to challenge its own bourgeoisie, which is already linked up in brotherhood against it with the bourgeois of all other countries, and Herr Bismarck's international policy of conspiracy. In fact, the internationalism of the program stands even infinitely below that of the Free Trade Party. The latter also asserts that the result of its efforts will be, quote, the international brotherhood of peoples, but it also does something to make trade international, and by no means contents itself with the consciousness that...
So let's review what his critique here of that fifth sentence, that even though it's speaking of international, like of brotherhood between people, as working classes organized within their national context, it's not giving any concrete stuff there regarding any internationalism. It's because any liberal or conservative even can talk of brotherhood between men. Hell, it's in the Bible.
Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, as leftists, when we talk of solidarity internationalism, like we're not really talking about brotherhood or sisterhood, I suppose. Because yeah, I mean, you kind of get that with
It's
second
kind of
wave.
that, but
I don't know. Well, I think he's calling out that the word's not very strong because all these other ideologies use it. Um, and I sort of you'll hear it over and over in our media, you know, brotherhood, sisterhood, and I don't know. It just seems like a limited community. You know, it's like saying my community or our communities, and it's meant to be. It's used with an intent of like being general and and open ended about who's included in that.
sure.
But at the same time, almost like when it's used, I'm really just musing here, that it's also used to gatekeep, to exclude. And I think it's sort of it's Schrodinger's community. It's this phrasing, the rhetoric is used both to include as many and exclude as many as possible. Especially when you put an identity signifier in front of community. You
Yeah.
know, queer community, black community, you know, Latino community. Who counts as that? Who doesn't? Why use communities like that? And I think brotherhood or sisterhood is kind of does the same thing. And although I don't quite know what word to use instead of community, like, you know, when I want to say socialism, I do use community centered economics
Sure.
because I'm trying to use the language of the activists who will use community at every motion because it's mostly because that word is acceptable to liberals
Yeah,
and the
it's a popular
establishment.
phrase. Yeah.
And in the establishment, they're okay with you talking about community. Who doesn't
Sure.
love
Yeah.
community? Hillary Clinton will say it takes a community to raise a child.
Right.
They will use that rhetoric. They don't mean any of it,
No, of
and
course
thus
not.
I feel like
We're definitely not part of their community.
that disingenuity kind of trickles down in a way when anyone uses the language that's safe.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
You're sort of forced, even unwillingly, to accept the framing or the disingenuity, how disingenuous it is.
Yeah.
Almost like, you know, you have to. It's like secondhand hypocrisy.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm talking myself into like, look, I just need to use the word socialism more in my posts and when I talk to people, and just if they get all freaked out, then they can get freaked out, and
Yeah.
if they don't, then they're the people I actually want to recruit. I'm just afraid that, you know, there's a certain risk that if you scare enough people, then they will coalesce into opposition.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if you do have an actual group of people who are for what you know, with you, there could be more people against you. And that's bad politics. And that's sort of why, whether it be the old farts of the DSA or this Democratic Socialist panel that I was listening to, where again it's like these old farts, who editors of Dissent magazine and these publications that have been running for
Forever. Yeah.
80 years, and they're just now, you know, maybe the conversation was 2019. And they're talking about like how it's so, you know, suddenly safer to, you know, actually say the word socialist, and when they say it, they do mean just God, even they just mean welfare capitalism or something, or some
Right.
nationalization.
Strong
They're not very strong about it.
welfare
But just the fact that like the DSA only had 6,000 members and now it has 60,000, you know, over a few years, like that's a big deal. But at the same time, well, anyway, I was just like, well, what the fuck were you doing all my lifetime? But I understand it's like they really didn't have a lot to work with. But I don't know. I kind of feel like I feel like they did have a lot to work with, you know, like all the angst of Gen X and millennials, and like how, you know, the whole generation, like the whole tone of the '90s was just like how fucked up, you know, and trapped everyone is because the future's been canceled. But in the same way, the Soviet Union, I guess I'm tying it to that, Like if you speak out against how the future is canceled and how like maybe we need a new future, a new vision, now you're a troublemaker,
Right.
and you get censored,
Now you're a counter-revolutionary. Yeah.
or a revolutionary in our context,
Sure.
and thus a terrorist, which, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we're not better than the Soviet Union in some ways, a lot of ways. Anyway,
all people are carrying on trade at home. The international activity of the working classes does not in any way depend on the existence of the International Workingmen's Association. This was only the first attempt to create a central organ for the activity, an attempt which was a lasting success on account of the impulse which it gave, but which was no longer realizable in its historical form after the fall of the Paris Commune. Bismarck's Norddeutsche was absolutely right when it announced, to the satisfaction of its master, that the German Workers' Party had sworn off internationalism in the new program. Next sentence. Quote, starting from these basic principles, the German Workers' Party strives by all legal means for the free state and socialist society, that abolition of the wage system together with the iron law of wages and exploitation in every form, the elimination of all social and political inequality, unquote.
is it just
I shall
wages?
return to the, quote, free state.
I think we got into this when we were reading it, that like I don't think exploitation only comes from the iron law of wages, and just the nationalist character. It's like they're the red manga, not red manga, the kami manga.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, red manga. I think that is the
That's
the
redundant,
Pat
but
socks.
you know what I mean. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Pat socks. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. The very class reductionist, and everything else is just CIA ops and stuff like that.
I saw it was a comic on Facebook, posted by a conservative, but it had a good. Well, okay, so this is what it was. It was like you had two characters, patriot and national. No, supremacy. So supremacy is like, so it's using the metaphor of homeowners, where the patriot wants to just improve their house for the sake of it and so on, and the supremacist is like, you should love my house, you should move into my house is the best house, and I'm gonna fight you for how great my house is, and I'm gonna beat you because my house is so great. And I think in between them is like, I don't know, I forget if it's like an NBC or just a rando, but it's meant to like the difference between supremacism and patriotism, but it's all within the umbrella of nationalism, right? So you have this conservative say like, well, look, being a patriot means you're a nationalist, and supremacy is just that supremacy is just the extreme version of nationalism. And I commented like, I actually agree with this conservative. Although I'm one of the subversives that he's, like you have to have a line and say you're not just a patriot but a nationalist, because otherwise, like what the woke mob are going to be patriots now, because they want to make America better, not the way I want. And he has a point. You have to not be, nationalism is bad, regardless of whether it puts itself in the cloth of being a patriot. It has this positive connotation being a patriot, but when you examine what's the real difference? Is there a difference?
Mm-hmm.
No, there isn't. Not that I've been able to see.
Yeah, just different flavors of the same thing.
Later. So, in future, the German Workers' Party has got to believe in Lassalle's iron law of wages. That this may not be lost, the nonsense is perpetrated of speaking of the, quote, abolition of the wage system, should read system of wage labor, quote, together with the iron law of wages. If I abolish wage labor, then naturally I abolish its laws also, whether they are of iron or sponge. But Lassalle's attack on wage labor turns almost solely on this so-called law, in order, therefore, to prove that Lassalle's sect has conquered, the, quote, wage system must be abolished, quote, together with the iron law of wages, and not without it. It is well known that nothing of the, quote, iron law of wages is Lassalle's except the word iron, borrowed from Goethe's, quote, great eternal iron laws. The word iron is a label by which the true believers recognize one another. But if I take the law with Lassalle's stamp on it, and consequently in his sense, then I must also take it with his substantiation for it. And what is that? As Lange already showed shortly after Lassalle's death, it is the Malthusian theory of population, preached by Lange himself. But if this theory is correct, then again, I cannot abolish the law, even if I abolish wage labor 100 times over, because the law then governs not only the system of wage labor, but every social system. Basing themselves directly on this, the economists have been proving for 50 years and more that socialism cannot abolish poverty, which has its basis in nature, but can only make it general, distribute it simultaneously over the whole surface of society.
Sound familiar?
But all
Sounds
this
familiar.
is not the main thing. Quite apart from the false Lassallean
So it's pointing
formation
out
of
that
law,
the
truly
logic that
outrageous
as long as the population's increasing, you can't, like, there will be this pressure on wages to be low because there's too many people.
Right.
Right? There's a surplus labor.
Too many
whatever.
mouths to fill.
So yeah, too many mouths.
Population.
So like when any mention of that is Malthusian and just like, which yeah, I mean they don't want to admit it, but liberals do this, and I mean any liberal or conservative. And by the way, I listened to a talk interview about like a book is being released by a Marxist called Liberal Socialism, which is to say that we're socialists, but that does not mean we're anti-free speech, assembly rights, and other types of liberal rights. It's that our way of thinking is about making sure that that's actually possible. We use liberal, we're talking about economic liberals. So, you know, that's something to put in our rhetoric, I think.
Definitely.
Ageist retrogression consists in the following. Since Lassalle's death, there has asserted itself in our party the scientific understanding that wages are not what they appear to be, namely the value or price of labor, but only a masked form for the value or price of labor power. Thereby, the whole bourgeois conception of wages hitherto, as well as all the criticism hitherto directed against this conception, was thrown overboard once and for all. It was made clear that the wage worker has permission to work for his own subsistence, that is, to live, only insofar as he works for a certain time gratis for the capitalist, and hence also for the latter's co-consumers of surplus value. That the whole capitalist system of production turns on the increase of this gratis labor by extending the working day, or by developing the productivity, that is, increasing the intensity or labor power, etc. That consequently the system of wage labor is a system of slavery, and indeed of a slavery which becomes more severe in proportion as the social productive forces of labor develop, whether the worker receives better or worse payment. And after this understanding has gained more and more ground in our party, some return to Lassalle's dogma, although they must have known that Lassalle did not know what wages were, but, following in the wake of the bourgeois economists, took the appearance for the essence of the matter. It is as if, among slaves who have at last got behind the secret of slavery and broken out in rebellion, a slave still in thrall to obsolete notions were to inscribe on the program of the rebellion, slavery must be abolished because the feeding of slaves in the system of slavery cannot exceed a certain low maximum. Does not the mere fact that the representatives of our party were capable of perpetrating such a monstrous attack on the understanding that is spread among the mass of our party prove, by itself, with what criminal levity and with what lack of conscience they set to work in drawing up this compromise program? Instead of the indefinite concluding phrase of the paragraph, quote, the elimination of all social and political inequality, it ought to have been said that with the abolition of class distinctions, all social and political inequality arising from them would disappear of itself. Next sentence, quote, the German Workers' Party, in order to pave the way to the solution of the social question, demands the establishment of producers' cooperative societies with state aid under the democratic control of the toiling people. The producers' cooperative societies are to be called into being for industry and agriculture on such a scale that the socialist organization of the total labor will arise from them, unquote. After the Lassallean, quote, iron law of wages, the physic of the profit, the way to it is, quote, paved in worthy fashion. In place of the existing class struggle appears a newspaper scribbler's phrase, quote, the social question, to the, quote, solution of which one, quote, paves the way. Instead of arising from the revolutionary process of the transformation of society, the, quote, socialist organization of the total labor, quote, arises from the, quote, state aid that the state gives to the producers' cooperative societies.
Yep. Yeah, so still thinking that everyone's going to need to be, or just that robust social programs are what is needed. And if we're going to have those programs, we have to have capitalists. That's what it sounds like to me.
Certainly it is in our contemporary programs to have like a state bank or state banking. So there is financing available for co-op economy, participatory economy, community economy. I suppose we're sure that we just make sure that we don't say this is so we can abolish the wage system, because it doesn't. And it certainly doesn't abolish private property. Though the more public municipalization, the better. That sort of does erode, and that sort of a materialist struggle is that whatever society we're building is a continuation of the current one. It is all not changed all at once. When we change a part of it or a certain amount of it through co-ops, that will create some kind of backlash or pushback or just it will create new conditions, and then it doesn't start all over again, but the situation has now changed a bit. In the same way that the workers' movement changed the situation with the New Deal, and we've been working from that. But yeah, it's kind of pointing out like it all seems to be one big critique of LaSalle, which I'm sure he's written in other places, hammering LaSalle and other socialists of his time, like Proudhon with his critique of the critique. And but that was all in the 1850s. So this is like 15 years later. So it's a different host of characters who are thought leaders of the socialist movement. And he's just sort of pointing out just like all the dead ends that are kind of occurring with the rhetoric here. Whether it's not internationalist enough, it's and Bismarck is like yes, and yes, state aid. I can provide state aid. Come join. Come be non. More democratic socialists. Social democrats, the better. The SPD are all welcome to be part of the government. And then eventually it leads to them being full nationalists and like, oh yeah, we're going to be the ones that actually instigate World War I, or at the very least create the foreign policy. Because the German state is still competing with Great Britain, right? Sure. Not Great Britain's ruling class, but all of Great Britain, the whole economic system of the world. But they're doing it through German nationalism, mostly because of all of these other parts of German society that they're working alongside, right? They're not quite subverting. So I think what Marx is like, look, take part, grow your influence, but do it in a way where you're not supporting or enabling the regressive parts of society. That you are in fact in conflict with them, even as you get elected to seats, or pass policies, or get a seat at the table. Although I suppose meeting at the table and working out a big deal, a new deal, or union contracts, you're enabling the capitalists when you do that. You're enabling the system when you do that.
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent. Though, so it's sort of like, but a lot of these deals and stuff are more about buying time so that you can keep growing that influence until you're the majority, and then you don't have to meet them at the table. Or that the deal now is more more of the socialization.
Sure.
and more liberalism and more democracy.
In which the state, not the workers, quote, calls into being. It is worthy of Lassalle's imagination that with state loans one can build a new society just as well as a new railway. From the remnants of a sense of shame, state aid has been put under the democratic control of the, quote, toiling people. In the first place, the majority of the toiling people in Germany consists of peasants, not proletarians. Second, democratic means in German Volksherrschaftlich, by the rule of the people. But what does control by the rule of the toiling people mean? And particularly in the case of a toiling people, which, through these demands that it puts to the state, expresses its full consciousness that it neither rules nor is ripe for ruling. It would be superfluous to deal here with the criticism of the recipe prescribed by Boucher in the reign of Louis Philippe, in opposition to the French socialists and accepted by the reactionary workers of the Atelier. The chief offense does not lie in having inscribed this specific nostrum in the program, but in taking, in general, a retrograde step from the standpoint of a class movement to that of a sectarian movement. That the workers desire to establish the conditions for cooperative production on a social scale, and first of all on a national scale, in their own country, only means that they are working to revolutionize the present conditions of production, and it has nothing in common with the foundation of cooperative societies with state aid. But as far as the present cooperative societies are concerned, they are of value only insofar as they are the independent creations of the workers, and not protégés either of the governments or of the bourgeois. I come now to the democratic section. Quote, the free basis of the state. First of all, according to two, the German Workers' Party strives for, quote, the free state. Free state, what is this? It is by no means the aim of the workers, who have got rid of the narrow mentality of humble subjects, to set the state free. In the German Empire, the state is almost as, quote, free as an...
I want to explore that distinction he made between a class movement and a sectarian movement. Because in the following sentences, I didn't quite get the picture of what is the difference that a sectarian movement or party has policies. Like I was waiting for like him saying the policies only affect Germans or they only affect certain workers. And maybe that's what he was getting
That
at
could
with
be,
the,
yeah. It's just
these
more
cooperatives will
trade
not help.
unionism sort of thing.
Yeah, the peasant. It doesn't really help the peasantry, and it doesn't develop any kind of democratic skills, the ability to govern. And that a class movement does that because by having doing dual power, everyone is learning how to govern, not only themselves or other things.
Yeah.
When you organize independently,
it cuts across the entire class. It's not just looking out for the interests of railroad workers or pipe fitters or something like that.
You kind of see that in co-op economics, where you still have a cadre, like a class of managers or the educated and this division of labor. Maybe in consumer co-ops more than worker ones.
Definitely consumer more than
So maybe I'm just thinking more about them, and that's what Marx is kind of thinking about, or what we were thinking about.
Even in something like the Mondragon Corporation, I'm sure there's still hierarchies that develop and get entrenched too. So you're probably right that it's more so.
Yeah, that's not my critique of the Mondragon though, because they do operate along non-capitalist lines and values.
Oh, for sure.
In their internal decision making, I suppose, but not maybe the external, in which they are just a market actor. And so, like, they're not. It's market socialism, but only within itself. In the same way that Walmart is a planned economy, but that doesn't make it socialist in the least. But it's what people call corporate social. If they're being good faith, corporate socialism.
Sure.
Which, but I don't really like it. I don't know. I don't want to use those two words together ever, but because I think it gives people the wrong impression about socialism. That socialism is just when you plan the economy,
Just central
or
planning,
it's or it's just when you have not liberalism, or it's or no when it's democratic, which it is sort of, but I think we want to hit on, or I want to hit on, just like, no, it does mean like, hitting on private property and capital and capitalist logic, in the marketplace. That's why, like, market socialism is, you have economy of markets, but the logic is, the purpose of firms is not to maximize profit, but to maximize social goods. And thus it's put the social back in socialism. That, look, all it refers to is when things are actually social and not anything else, no matter what form it takes. It's the purpose of it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's an important distinction.
In Russia, freedom consists in converting the state from an organ superimposed upon society into one completely subordinate to it. And today, too, the forms of state are more free or less free to the extent that they restrict the, quote, freedom of the state. The German Workers' Party, at least if it adopts the program, shows that its socialist ideals are not even skin deep, in that, instead of treating existing society, and this holds good for any future one, as the basis of the existing state, or of the future state in the case of future society, it treats the state rather as an independent entity that possesses its own intellectual, ethical, and libertarian bases. And what of the riotous misuse which the program makes of the words present-day state, present-day society, and of the still more riotous misconception it creates in regard to the state to which it addresses its demands? Quote, present-day society is capitalist society, which exists in all civilized countries, more or less free from medieval admixture, more or less modified by the particular historical development of each country, more or less developed. On the other hand, the, quote, present-day state changes with a country's frontier. It is different in the Prusso-German Empire from what it is in Switzerland, and different in England from what it is in the United States. The present-day state is therefore a fiction. Nevertheless, the different states of the different civilized countries, in spite of their motley diversity of forms,
it's the system and relations
common,
between the states.
That they are based.
So it's not so much the states themselves you need to worry about, it's the relations between the states that make up the world order. So don't worry about just your state, the state over you. But of course, again, I've been thinking about this way ever since I started college, of like, we really stopped, like, everyone keeps talking about the government like it's something separate.
Yeah.
That it's not part, like, yeah, you're not part of it, but like, it's not separate from society. It's not separate from your community. It is of your community, whether you like it or not.
Shapes it more than
So,
anything.
like, when you're mad at the government, you're mad at yourself, not just for letting it get this far or whatever, for not being involved or whatever. It's like, as if your life could be possible without the state.
Right.
Because it wouldn't be.
No.
None of this would be possible. It's like, you wouldn't have modernity without a state. That's the point. That the state developed as part of modernity, interrelating with capital and all the other stuff. And then relationships too.
Yeah.
It's not needlessly complicated. It's just a sort of a truism we can have.
It is, yeah.
That it's all connected and it's all one thing. Society is all of these things, and that's why anarchists sort of annoy me, or rather, I think their theory is incomplete when they just see the state as being like this alien, the Leviathan. I mean, they're just taking reactionary. They're just taking Rousseau, not Rousseau. Or do I think Rousseau? But Leviathan at face value. They're taking conservative philosophers and reactionary philosophers, political theorists at face value, because they talk about the state as this all-encompassing authority that's needed to discipline the person. and so there are these tendencies on the left of trying to solve our psychological problems with authority or community policing, or at least that's something that Ashley Frawley talks about, and that's her kind of thesis and what she's worried about. We have psychological problems, but we try to fix them with, well, we try to fix social problems with psychology, and when that doesn't work, individual psychology, when that doesn't work, instead of reformulating the question about what the social issue is and how we're trying to solve it, we're like, well, it must be the people are broken and we can't fix them. So it's like the best we can do is help the needy, but never try to actually address the cause of poverty or any questions like that, because
never think about why they are the needy or how they got there.
Yeah.
Just
or if you do, it becomes too big and there's nothing like we are able to do about it currently.
Yeah.
So it's not worth going that direction, because we don't have a big workers class movement. We don't have a class movement. We have a bunch of sectarian stuff. And that's sort of where the communists, like it's ironic, I suppose. The people who talk about class movements the most are the most sectarian groups, or at least they're called that. But I suppose what they have to offer is that they talk about class struggle and class movements. I just don't see how that ever materializes. Right. And maybe that's something even Marx couldn't. I mean, he can articulate that, but in real life, it shows up in all these different ways, with all these kind of compromised language or messed up language or confused policy plans, which shows up in I was just going through the Green Party amendment proposed amendments, and there were some improvements, like we're not going to use the word sex. We don't use the word sex work. We're going to use sex for pay, because that way you can distinguish between or it actually includes people who are being coerced into sex work. So if you use sex work, you can't distinguish. That's funny. The one paragraph was kind of about it's impossible to distinguish between prostitution that is consensual versus those that are trafficked.
Being trafficked, yeah.
And I'm like, of course you can. You just call trafficking slavery. Yeah. It's slavery.
Yeah.
It's not work, it's slavery. We don't call that working.
No.
Or with sex work.
That's why it's trafficking.
I suppose, but when I asked the question in the comments, we're using Lumio, the person from the Women's Caucus, I believe, clarified that it's a matter of when you use sex work and it's used by workers organizing in workplaces, but there are also all these other ways that people do sex, that money's exchanged, but it's not as an employee, it's not as a contractor, there's all these other ways that it happens, and we want to, and the change in the platform is to decriminalize rather than do the Swedish model, which is what's in there now. And so it's replacing that, which finally, why did it take two cycles to do that? But it's being proposed by the Women's Caucus now, and or at least approved by them. But there's also all these other paragraphs about trafficking and all this, and it seems overwritten to me. But I'm sure it isn't to people who see the tragedy and know it. Sure. But I think it's enough just to say it's slavery, and we've got to put a stop to it.
Yeah, that's fair. Mm-hmm.
And that there's always language about we also want to provide programs. Oh yeah, it's in the new link. It's in the new plank, to provide programs for those who want to leave sex for pay employment. Because it's there's always this, and that's, I think, to appease the third and second wave feminists, because it's they think it's all completely terrible, and only 10% are only there because they actually want to be in it. Otherwise, it's like any other freaking sex, any work. Yeah. But it's more degrading and sexualized, right? So it's thus to be opposed.
Yeah, but it's also fine to protect that 10%, even that number is wrong. But
Well, there's certainly been an ignored 10%,
yeah.
which the Swedish model was a step towards rectifying, because the Swedish model, to be, if you need a reminder of
Yeah,
the
could you say
audience,
more about the
that
Swedish model?
it's that you decriminalize the sellers of sex, but not the buyers. So the Johns are still getting arrested, or the consumers get arrested, criminalized, penalized, but you're just not locking up the prostitutes or the sex workers.
Sure.
But it didn't make it safer, and it doesn't make it, like, the data shows that it doesn't make anything easier, and it certainly doesn't, like, and again, decriminalization is not the same as legalization.
Right.
But it does allow those who do sex for pay. It's a sort of weird. It's sex work is such, like, because that's like sex work is one noun, so you can kind of use it in any other kind of rhetoric. But sex for pay, using that as a noun, I don't know if I could get used to it.
I think yeah.
But it is more
Sex-
accurate in a legal sense when talking
it?
about it.
Okay.
I don't know. I think it is. Because, like, I'm just going on by the argument that sex work is referring to it like as work, and as a class, like a class. When there's all of these instances where they're doing it, but not as a category. I suppose I didn't want to get into the weeds with some debate with just a rep from the caucus, and I'm sure. But the thing about the platform planks is that they're sort of discussed or debated. They're taken as is, by the way. So platform plank is proposed. It's going through, and it's endorsed by a caucus or your state party, and then it's sent to the platform committee, which then approves it or disapproves it. And that's usually just based on, does this pass the sniff test of the 10 key values? Does it contradict a bunch of other things? Does this make sense at all? They're not making a value judgment. They leave that up to the convention, where it's just a straight up or down vote. Okay. But that kind of sucks, because you have a bunch of delegates like me coming in, and we're just given this list of amendments, and we kind of have to vote up or down as is.
Right.
It's like we literally like this platform that Marx is talking about. Like, well, maybe we just want to tweak some words.
Sure.
But the process for having a delegation, a convention of hundreds, doing word tweaks to amendments, it sounds like a nightmare, and it would be. Because trust me, I was doing that with Occupy in working groups with just 20 people, and those meetings were hours.
I'm sure.
Just tweaking language to statements, and but sometimes they were really important. Like, this is the statement we're going to put out blast. This is like our main agenda.
But you don't want it to be every meeting for everything.
Yes, and we certainly don't want it for every plank. But some of the amendments are just housekeeping and updating certain things. Like the anti-nuke one is sort of just putting in the language about the latest rhetoric about small reactors being safe reactors, and this or that. But the main one of the planks is that there's no such thing as safe disposal. It's an oxymoron of toxic or radioactive waste. Yeah, it just it just doesn't exist. Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Sure.
So anyway, yeah.
Based on modern bourgeois society, only one more or less capitalistically developed. They have, therefore, also certain essential characteristics in common. In this sense, it is possible to speak of the present-day state in contrast with the future, in which its present root, bourgeois society, will have died off. The question then arises, what transformation will the state undergo in communist society? In other words, what social functions will remain in existence there that are analogous to present state functions? This question can only be answered scientifically, and one does not get a flea hop nearer to the problem by a thousandfold combination of the word people with the word state. Between capitalist and communist society, there lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of the one into the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period, in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, the program does not deal with this, nor with the future state of communist society. Its political demands contain nothing beyond the old democratic litany familiar to all: universal suffrage, direct legislation, popular rights, a people's militia, etc. They are a mere echo of the bourgeois People's Party, of the League of Peace and Freedom. They are all demands which, insofar as they are not exaggerated in fantastic presentation, have already been realized. Only the state to which they belong does not lie within the borders of the German Empire, but in Switzerland, the United States, etc.
I
This
have
sort
this
of state
I have
of the
this kind of
future
eye roll
is a
that Marx is relating of listing all these other like past parties and orgs whenever term limits are brought up. It's like, oh God, yeah, the perennial political demand of term limits, which gets shot down. Like it's a demand without any movement. It's never had a movement. I don't know why it doesn't. It seems so eminently popular,
Yeah, it
but
seems one of those things. It's always popular.
there seems to be no force or organization that's willing to actually take it up as like we're going to campaign for this and we're going to campaign on it, or that there will be Democrats that will campaign on term limits, or maybe they do, but they never mean it. They get in the office and they don't, and they just say, "Oh, actually, no." Now I have the
Yeah, there's a
reactionary
good reason
position
not to.
of
Yeah.
we can't have term limits because then the best people wouldn't be able. I mean, look how long it takes to be a good legislator. It takes years of training and learning, and if there's term limits, then no one will get to be a veteran legislator. It's like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Right?
It's going to empower bureaucrats, I guess, and you don't elect those, so let us be the guides and facilitators. But it puts an end to careerism, unless your career is hopping between a lot of different offices, which is
Which
fine with me.
go for it, but you can't
Um,
necessarily win in every context. So that's not going to be.
Yeah, well, I think that's the fear of that class or caste rather,
Yeah.
governing class caste. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're getting close to the end here.
yeah.
present-day state, although existing outside the framework of the German Empire. But one thing has been forgotten. Since the German Workers' Party expressly declares that it acts within the present-day national state, hence within its own state, the Prusso-German Empire, its demands would indeed be otherwise largely meaningless, since one only demands what one has not got. It should not have forgotten the chief thing, namely that all those pretty little gewgaws rest on the recognition of the so-called sovereignty of the people, and hence are appropriate only in a democratic republic. Since one has not the courage, and wisely so, for the circumstances demand caution, to demand the democratic republic, as the French workers' programs under Louis Philippe and under Louis Napoleon did, one should not have resorted either to the subterfuge, neither, quote, honest nor decent, of demanding things which have meaning only in a democratic republic from a state which is nothing but a police-guarded military despotism, embellished with parliamentary forms, alloyed with a feudal admixture, already influenced by the bourgeoisie, and bureaucratically carpentered, and then to assure this state into the bargain that one imagines one will be able to force such things upon it, quote, by legal means. Even vulgar democracy, which sees the millennium in the democratic republic, and has no suspicion that it is precisely in this last form of state of bourgeois society that the class struggle has to be fought out to a conclusion, even it towers mountains above this kind of democratism, which keeps within the limits of what is permitted by the police and not permitted by logic. That, in fact, by the word state, is meant the government machine, or the state insofar as it forms a special organism separated from society through division of labor, is shown by the words, quote, the German Workers' Party demands as the economic basis of the state a single progressive income tax, unquote, etc. Taxes are the economic basis of the government machinery and of nothing else. In the state of the future, existing in Switzerland, this demand has been pretty well fulfilled. Income tax presupposes various sources of income of the various social classes, and hence capitalist society. It is therefore nothing remarkable that the Liverpool financial reformers, bourgeois headed by Gladstone's brother, are putting forward the same demand as the program. Next sentence.
just relying on taxing the rich means you have to have rich people around forever for that to work.
Yeah, just skip that step and go. That's why the maximum is sort of like I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
Just skip all that stupid fucking steps. Like, oh yeah, we need to tax the rich though to fund the transition to socialism. Like, but that's going to lower the taxation you bring in, and then whatever you're spending from the state is not going to be able to be paid back. Although I guess I'm getting it backwards, and that's what the modern monetary theory folks are all about. That the state doesn't need to increase taxes; they just need to increase their spending, and that
Yeah.
increases the economy. But of course, which economy? The capitalist economy, or the nationalized, or the socialized economy? It's sort of that's where dual power is sort of important.
Mhm.
That this whole like we're going to use the state to conquer it, or we're going to use the bourgeois state, but it's like, well, I guess One Dime was the channel I'm sort of liking right
Yeah, I
now.
like them.
He just made a value like what do we mean by capitalist matrix? Like what do people miss about it? And he points out that like there's the state is the referee between
Mm-mm. Oh crap. Well, I don't know if you're still with us.
Oh, he
Dan.
froze up again. Am I frozen? He
You,
froze up on me. But I'll keep going. So am I back?
you're back.
Yeah, you're back with me. Okay. So one time's going into how the state, is not this, again, it's not above everything, but it's the referee between everything. It doesn't really serve directly the capitalists. I mean, we talk about them that way, and it's sort of hard to avoid, but that they're bought off, they do their bidding, and they do in ways. But they're also the facilitators to ensure that all the different competing capitalists and other classes are not fighting. And that's why, like, why do the Democrats have to lie to progressives about, like, or give them hope by giving them rhetorical bones or even pretending they're going to change policies or nominate Walls, who apparently does approve social democracy stuff.
Yeah.
But I made a TikTok kind of pointing out, like, don't talk about the stuff like Walls did it. Politicians allow these things to happen.
Right.
It's movements and people, class movement that did these things. Yes, we want politicians that will allow these things to occur and not just crush them or call them the police. But they'll do that too when it comes down to it, right? If it's a class struggle for sick pay, they'll approve of that. But if it's something like congestion pricing or social housing, they're going to veto that. Or in a real sense, to put it, Medicare for all. They block that shit all the time.
All the time.
And the compromise they offer is some more sick leave and whatever Wall says, done in Minnesota that's so fucking great. Give me a fucking break. It's angering.
Yeah.
Hearing about, like, seeing posts and progressive, and some of them are potential Greens that are basically just like, they could be turned around again later, but certainly the last 2 weeks they got Kamala fever.
Oh my
and
God.
they're already, now that
They're so
Biden
excited,
not
yeah.
the candidate, like they were only not excited because it was Biden. Now that it's not, now suddenly they have hope of a Democratic victory over Trump, and now they're enthusiastic about being blue model.
Yeah.
Or at least pretending that, well, we gotta elect Democrats first, then we can fight for progressive causes because they'll allow it. They won't veto it. They won't veto it all.
That's right.
But they'll veto most of it. I can tell you.
It's that old liberal proverb that now is not the right time.
Now it's not the right. Oh my God! It's every TikTok video I make. It's not all of them, but one of them, someone was literally just doing that, and they kept commenting too. Oh man, they couldn't. They wouldn't shut up. I think I responded, and that's sort of what started it. But but they were like, "Now's not the time," and I'm like, and I just asked, like, "Well, when was the time? Were you saying this last cycle? It
Yep.
wasn't the time?" And yeah, they were like,
The
"Yeah,
time
it
for
wasn't the
that,
time
yeah.
then. It's not the time now, and it
No.
won't be the time next time.
Right.
So it's not going to be the time. It's never going to be the time.
Never gonna be the time.
So just say
be
so when
honest.
it's yeah. Well, they are. I guess in the way they are being honest. It's not the time because it's never the time.
Right.
It's not something that's ever going to happen. It's I'm being a realist. Blah blah blah. And of course that's just fuck off. Then what? Why are you even talking to me then? You're trying to convince me that it's no use.
Right.
Good luck, because I think it's no use to do the opposite. It's no use to just be in an eternal present where Democrats just veto any progress.
Yep.
But I don't know. They see class movements and democratic socialists. DSA is they're pushing, and we're electing people like AOC. And fuck.
Yeah. Cool.
But in the meantime, you got Kavana Savant and Workers Rise Up. And they're talking about a workers movement. So I suppose they're the ones working to manifest that. And they endorse Stein and they'll endorse third parties, but they do talk as far as like independent class movement for workers, and we'll endorse independent power stuff, so or tactics that preserve independence. So I'm cool with that, and I like it. So yeah, we still got some minutes. Do you want to, since we started so late?
We let's see. We only got a few minutes left. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah.
If we just speed through the rest of this stuff.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of his commentary at the end too. This particular audiobook reader, so we can probably cut it off when he comes back in.
Sentence, quote, "The German Workers' Party demands as the intellectual and ethical basis of the state, 1. Universal and equal elementary education by the state, universal compulsory school attendance, free instruction," unquote. Equal elementary education? What idea lies behind these words? Is it believed that in present-day society, and it is only with this that one has to deal, education can be equal for all classes? Or is it demanded that the upper classes also shall be compulsorily reduced to the modicum of education, the elementary school, that alone is compatible with the economic conditions, not only of the wage workers, but of the peasants as well? Universal compulsory school attendance, free instruction. The former exists even in Germany, the second in Switzerland, and in the United States in the case of elementary schools. If in some states of the latter country, higher education institutions are also, quote, free, that only means, in fact, defraying the cost of education of the upper classes from the general tax receipts. Incidentally, the same holds good for free administration of justice, demanded under A, Part 5. The administration of criminal justice is to be had free everywhere. That of civil justice is concerned almost exclusively with conflicts over property, and hence affects almost exclusively the possessing classes. Are they to carry on their litigation at the expense of the national coffers? This paragraph on the schools should at least have demanded technical schools, theoretical and practical, in combination with the elementary school. Elementary education by the state is altogether questionable, defining by a general law the expenditures on the elementary schools, the qualifications of the teaching staff, the branches of instruction, etc., and, as is done in the United States, supervising the fulfillment of these legal specifications by state inspectors is a very different thing from appointing the state as the educator of the people. Government and church should rather be equally excluded from any influence on the school, particularly, indeed, in the Prusso-German Empire, and one should not take refuge in the rotten subterfuge that one is speaking of a state of the future. We have seen how matters stand in this respect. The state has need, on the contrary, of a very stern education by the people. But the whole program, for all its democratic clang, is tainted through and through by the Thessalian sect's servile...
Which part?
The state should not educate the people. It is the people that should educate the state.
Yeah, that's a good line.
But I'm not sure what, okay, how do you advance how do you do all of these technical schools? How do you have
That's
universal
a good question.
technical and what did he say, philosophical education? So, because at the time, high school was essentially like going to college,
Hmm.
and thus university after that was like purely then academic
Hmm.
and not something that anyone really did um,
Yeah.
as a practical matter.
Unless they were from the upper class, yeah.
Yes, but again, then like the university was a place of creating new knowledge, and that thus getting a bachelor's was like a really big deal,
Sure.
and truly for the elite. Um, for those, yeah, but yeah. But it's interesting that I guess for Mark's technical school is he does mean like high school, going beyond
Hmm.
primary,
Okay.
because going up to the 8th grade was like a big deal then. A lot like only half the kids finished 8th grade or got to 8th grade, and that was ever increasing. It was expanding at the time as it was becoming more normalized and again a state function.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of my grandmas, I don't think she made it past 8th grade, and that was pretty normal for her generation. So, like, even, I guess she was born in the 20s, so even in the 20s, still fairly common to not be able
Yeah,
to go.
I was talking about this last year where in 1950, half of the 18-year-old population was not graduating high school. So either they weren't even starting high school or they just weren't finishing it.
Yeah, let's get other
Like
jobs.
they had to start working at 16 or 14
Yeah,
or something like that.
sure. All right, finishing up.
Belief in the state, or what's no better, by a democratic belief in miracles, or rather, it is a compromise between these two kinds of belief in miracles, both equally remote from socialism. Freedom of science, says a paragraph of the Prussian Constitution. Why then here? Freedom of conscience, if one desired, at this time of the Kulturkampf, to remind liberalism of its old catchwords, it surely could have been done only in the following form. Everyone should be able to attend their religious as well as their bodily needs without the police sticking their noses in. But the Workers' Party ought, at any rate in this connection, to have expressed its awareness of the fact that bourgeois freedom of conscience is nothing but the toleration of all possible kinds of religious freedom of conscience, and that for its part it endeavors rather to liberate the conscience from the witchery of religion. But one chooses not to transgress the bourgeois level. I have now come to the end, for the appendix that now follows in the program does not constitute a characteristic component part of it. Hence,
All right, well, that would be the end of what we need to look at then. Unless we want to get into the appendix.
No, I'm good.
It's only a few.
Do we have any parting thoughts? Because it's sort of a mess. It's an old go over, and it's certainly as we've been grabbing about how it applies to today, or at least how the same questions are kind of still stirring, but in totally different context.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be basically the same sort of things that are being discussed between like your DSA and actual socialist parties. So, yeah.
No, it wouldn't be
Same.
probably an audiobook, but I do have articles that we could probably read, and these would be contemporary things that we
Yeah,
could
that
read
sounds great.
too and discuss.
I want to
Since
give
I
it a.
think that's sort of missing. Like I listened to it was you have the Revolutionary Communist Party forming, which is really just the echo of what broke up with the ISO. Um, it's not a remnant though. They do seem to be growing, or maybe it's the same amount of people. I don't know, but they seem to be doing the good kind of advertising campaign where they put stickers with QR codes. Like, are you a communist? Could you be a communist? Take our survey, and if you are, come pay some dues, come show up,
Hmm.
and get the basic Marxist education, which I think we put ourselves through over time. Because like one of the talks was like the communist perspectives of America or something, and it perspectives was in plural, but like I listened to the guy's speech, and it's like, well, he's just giving the baseline Marxist interpretation of American society, which I'm there's nothing problematic here, but it's sort of the same old from the last 60 years. There really isn't too much new here, maybe little updates based on current events, but it's like this really isn't anything new, and I kind of wish they would have something new to say, as in some tendencies, I do see new things being said and discussed, which is why I'm in that tendency, that eco-socialist tendency, where
Sure.
we're arguing over degrowth theory and how we actually develop, because we do have that mindset of development over acquisition, as put by the liberal socialist writer, which he wasn't writing of his vision of liberal socialism, but simply going through the political philosophy of the past and how all these socialists were also liberals, politically speaking, and how important that is to kind of integrate into our thinking and whatnot. Where's I going with that? But yeah. So how have you been doing with Tears of the Kingdom? Where are you at with that?
I'm doing pretty well. I was just about to get to the Goron, so I've done 2 of the 4 main temples. Haven't done as much in the depths part, but I've at least gotten all the light routes, so I have a map of all
Okay.
that down there. Got a lot of the
Has
area
Zelda
stuff
made
done.
her Has Zelda made her sacrifice yet?
No, that has not
Okay.
happened yet. So
I got it spoiled for me, so but it didn't really.
that's okay. It's
Not really a big
game's
deal.
been out for a year now, so yeah, that's
Zelda rarely does it have a twist, or when there is a twist, like okay, this is a good twist if you're 10, or something
yeah,
like that.
right.
Like the Wind Waker twist, or the twist where it's like you've time traveled, you've been asleep for 10 years, Link.
Yeah, right.
You miss the hostile takeover by Ganon. I'm like, well, that's bullshit.
Right, yeah, missed all the good stuff. But yeah, it's a
So
fun game, and plan to keep with it for now.
yeah, we're not making content off of it. Oh yeah, I keep catching up with just minor amounts of Caitlin Poroshenko. Why? Because what she does is so unique, and I'm fascinated by it. And there'll be her social streams or whatever will be very much focused on just listening to whatever socialist is talking, and how good they are at organizing and stuff. But then there was one Socialism Saturday stream where she actually was doing the call and response of okay, class, when they talk about property, what is it like? Why do they keep bringing up homelessness and housing people? And it's like, because they hate private property. And it's like, so it comes out that behind I understand socialists and the left better than even lefties do. Behind that is all of the anti-left or socialist, pure ideology,
Right, just
that makes no
bullshit
fucking
talking points.
sense.
Yeah.
It's the worst kind of libertarian. Because she herself has not read any theory whatsoever.
No.
She probably hasn't read any libertarian theory even. So she can't even reference Hayek or Mises or whatever, because she's not even able to critique socialists that way. She's only able to critique it. It's bad because it's bad, and they want to just take everything from you,
Right, because
including your
everything they
toothbrush.
say is lies.
She's literally saying she
yeah.
literally says stuff like scaremongers about how we want to take the toothbrushes. But she also includes your kids. She's always on and on about parental rights and how we socialists want to take your kids.
Oh my god.
It's like, we don't want to take your kids. We want to take your right away to abuse your kids.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. Well, her rhetoric doesn't include any of that. Doesn't include any good faith interpretation, actually. It's sort of odd in that she wants to learn and she discusses, but it's only in the context of hating the left, right?
Yeah.
It's like, that we're understanding the left so we can hate them more. And she doesn't, and so she'll rant about how the conservatives cannot organize and they suck. But it's not like she's organizing. It's so self-defeating. It's wonderful. But But the concern is that some of her streams are spy streams, like the one she was doing tonight, where she hops onto a Zoom call for the organizing for the march against the DNC. And it's not just an organizing call, it is that, but it's also a panel with Medea Benjamin and Bill Ayers. So like she puts in the title, like, you know, organizing call with terrorist. And I totally forgot. Oh yeah, the right will call Bill Ayers a terrorist because he was in their underground for 2 years. Because that whole project was just 2 years, and it was done, and they won't let it go. Fuck, you know, and so yeah, it's sort of fun, but it's also enraging. So I'll just turn that off. Like, oh fuck,
You gotta be
fuck
careful
you,
how much you
Caitlin, fuck
indulge.
you. So yeah, it's indulgence until she starts saying the worst, dumbest possible shit. Actually,
She's good at that.
and then it's like, oh yeah, she's not actually smart. She hasn't actually paid attention.
Oh.
She pays attention to leftists, but only the ones who are talking about organizing and not talking about policy.
Okay.
She will not like, and if a policy ever does come up, she glazes it over, or that's when she'll mention how. Actually, no, I think that was the difference. She's fun to watch when it's just like she's watching a theory person or a speech about organizing or class struggle. But then when it's a panel about policy, then she'll actually like do a call and response with her audience about policy, and then it's all just like, why is this policy shit? Why is it all boiled down to how the left just wants to take your toothbrush and your kids? I'm like, oh, that's all you're getting out of this? And everything, and all of our like justifications, she doesn't use that word, she uses excuses. Like, they have every excuse and they will use every excuse to recruit people, and they're gonna win. And I'm like, so you don't think any of it's justified, right? Because she'll like people will talk of like debunking, like, oh yeah, people in the chat will want to debunk what the left's saying. I'm like, we're not here to debunk. We're not here to debunk. We're here to listen and learn from them. But then like it'll be, we're not debunking them because we're just assuming they're wrong. Well, like she'll say like, they know that communism has failed whenever it's tried, but they don't care. They know, but they don't care.
Yeah.
So that's the way she puts it. So it's sort of funny when she like bitch slaps her audience, you know, for wanting to debunk leftists.
That's funny.
But and I always kind of read that in other streams as like, oh, she doesn't want to because she doesn't know how to debunk us, or she doesn't like, she doesn't want to engage on that level. But then like when it comes to debunking, it just, again, I guess I'm repeating myself because I'm just getting myself worked up.
You should try and get on her show sometime.
I really should, because she'll talk to communists.
Yeah.
But it's mostly like the Midwestern Marxist types, the ones who will critique identity politics, whatever.
Great.
So, but I'm curious, but like I don't know, like I guess I just have to watch her stream and actually watch the part where she talks, like you mentions her email, because her streams are like a half an hour of just promo, and I just like I'm not sitting through that.
Don't want to wade through all that, no.
Because she's insufferable when it comes to that.
I'm sure.
But she has like, she commissions music about like the left wants to. Okay, she has her rules of like the left, the woke agenda is to disrupt capitalism, take over the government, you know, and so on and so on. She recontextualizes like gender nonconformity into like, and that disrupts capitalism. It sort of does, but on a very conceptual level.
Yeah. And on the other hand, you have all the corporations pandering to it with their rainbow capitalism. So
yeah, but not gender
but
not so much gender nonconformity, because there'll still be a pushback against the non-safe queers.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
In fact, gay pride is not queer pride.
Fair enough.
Rainbow capitalism does not have a space for queers.
It's not profitable yet.
I guess it will be someday. Well, we want it's our goal to not. Well, how do we make that not happen? But I guess it's like queers are more communist because they're so marginalized. But if
Hmm.
they weren't, would they stop being communist? And that's something I'm anxious about. But there were tons of gays that were not communist and obviously not interested in being left.
Yeah.
So you see that with the log cabin Republicans.
Yeah, for
As
sure.
soon as it became acceptable to be gay in public, then those groups come out of the
Start
woodwork.
switching. Yeah.
I don't think it was the other way around, where once gays become acceptable, now there's not going to be any left wing gays.
True.
It's just that it's an identity that is separate from class struggle. Wouldn't you know? Identity isn't that an intersection?
Can't all be boiled down to it. Yeah.
No.
Right. All right. Well,
Uh,
this was a lot of fun. And yeah, can't wait to see what kind of stuff you bring next week for us
Yeah.
to check out.
Going back to videos, I still got a few of them. I think it'll be ethnicity stuff. And we'll go from there.
All right. Well, have a good one. See you next week.
See you next week.
All right. That's going to do it for me tonight. All right. Gotta fix my frame here. That's not going to work very well. Oh, well. Okay. Let's check in with Twitch and see if there's anyone we can shout out. I don't believe... No viewers on Twitch right now. So we'll just shout someone out at the end here. Oh, Matt Binder's on. I generally like Matt Binder's takes. So I'm going to say go check out Matt
Geico can help
Binder.
cover cars, homes, motorcycles.
And I'll put that up in the chat in case you're seeing this later on. So you too can check out his Twitch stream. What is he doing right now? He's talking about Elon. Probably the Elon Donald Trump interview on X. So that should be interesting. Here is his show link. Go check that out. And I will see you all on Sunday for more Tears of the Kingdom. Till then, have a good one.